Hello and welcome to the PowerFish podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Fish. We got a lot of stuff we're going to get to today, but first, we have a comment that we're going to respond to from our debate episode. How many episodes ago was that?
Three.
There you go. Yeah, well, we finally are getting around to reading a comment from it. And just as a reminder, if you have any comments, leave them down below. We will respond to them.
Anything. It could be anything.
At
It
all.
doesn't even have to be about the episode. Just say a fun fact and we'll respond to it. So, Emily Wade commented, quite a long comment, I might say, which I very much appreciate because clearly she watched the episode, which, I mean, that just means more than anything. So,
And that was a big episode.
and that was a big episode. So we can't express how much we appreciate anybody that watches episodes all the way through, because I mean, shoot, there's some stupid stuff in a lot of these episodes, so it takes some real grit to do that. But I don't agree with some of the things she said in her comment, and
as you'll do in the comment section of a debate.
yeah, as per standard for something like a debate. So I'm going to critique a couple of the things that she said, but this is simply a critique of things that she said. This is not, like I said, super appreciate that she even took the time to write out such a big comment, because it really does mean a lot. But she started it off with a book from R.C. Sproul that talks about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. And she later she said, ultimately, God is the divine authority in all matters. He proves his divinity when he answers Job in Job 38, showing that he was there from the beginning on creation. So this is something that I wish I made a little bit more clear during the debate with my brother, because this is obviously, if you've seen the debate, something that he didn't understand whatsoever. It's that reading scripture doesn't mean anything. In the context of establishing a God, reading a book really doesn't mean anything at all. And what I mean by that is, if you go to the Bible to try and prove to me that God exists because your justification is that it's the divinely inspired word of God, we first have to establish that there's a God to inspire this thing. Otherwise, it is no different from any book. It is as effective as reading Lord of the Rings to prove that Middle Earth exists, right? It is yes, the Bible is obviously an incredible book that has a lot of connections. There's a lot of wisdom, but there is not a single word that is written that screams divinity. A really good writer, in fact, a collection of them that we don't know, can write this. In fact, many even bigger novels than the Bible have been written and can contain just innumerable amounts of wisdom as well. There is nothing divine about the book. And when you start opening it to try and establish that God exists, you are doing, just imagine, let's just put ourselves in the position of a Christian doing this to try and convert an atheist. If you open this book and start reading, imagine a Muslim walked up and opened the Quran and started reading to you to justify that their God exists. How would you feel as the Christian? You'd be like, I don't care about your book. Like, the Quran is not the Quran's not the divinely inspired word of God like the Bible is, right? like you wouldn't, or especially nobody would take this seriously, is if a Mormon came up and started reading the Book of Mormon to you. That would be a joke. And that is the exact same thing as if you are the atheist and a Christian opens the Bible to convince you that God exists. Christians, you will you can get a Christian to start talking like an atheist if you try to convince them of a different religion. Really, it's that simple. Like my brother, when he started talking about Mormons, he started talking about how Joe Smith is an obvious charlatan, yet he's blind to the fact that we don't even know who most of the biblical authors are. And they're a lot older than Joe Smith. At least Joe Smith is in recent history. So, like,
we have better records of the goings on in those times.
Right. So they can critically look at other doctrines and assess them in the same way that an atheist looks at the Bible, but they can't. They can sometimes, but specifically in my brother's case, he did not put that same scrutiny on his own religion. It is because he grew up with it. So did I. He doesn't know how to do that with his own book because he starts with. He probably does know how to do that with his own book, but clearly he doesn't. He starts with a conclusion and then reads to find the evidence. And that is not how you learn. That is not how you learn truth at all. When you start with a conclusion. But we were raised and indoctrinated with the conclusion. So that was our starting point from as soon as we popped out of the womb.
Well, I mean, you go into a church and you go into a church with a question, let's say, and what does any churchgoer say to you? Well, you get in the book. You got to consult the Bible. That's what they say. Disregarding the fact that there are a lot of issues in life that cannot be solved with a Bible verse, and especially the issue of, is the Bible correct?
Yes,
can also not be solved within Scripture.
So let's just go through the step-by-step process of what needs to happen for the Bible to hold any weight. So first, you need to establish that there is a God. Already, nearly an impossible task. Okay?
Show is.
And then you have to establish that your religious book is the word of that God. Again, quite the task, especially when something like the Book of Mormon or the Quran build on what the Bible has already, the foundation of the Bible has already laid. Like, how can you know that these books that came after the Bible and build on the Bible are not further revelations from God? How could you possibly know that? So there is steps that need to happen before the Bible is to be taken seriously as a tool to establish credibility in God. There's a reason apologists don't, in a debate, just start reading Bible verses, right? They don't do that. Apologists don't use the Bible as a tool to establish the existence of God. Now, if we're talking about more nuanced things like like resurrection of Jesus and historical stuff, sure, we can pull out the Bible. But the establishment of the existence of God, the Bible is a useless tool. And like I said, that is exactly why you don't see apologists start whipping out the Bible when you ask them to tell you if God exists. Because they know better.
It's because you can use the Bible as a historical text because it was written in a time before it now, basically.
Yeah.
But you cannot use it for truth claims because it is inherently biased. It is what it is.
It is pushing a narrative.
You can use it as a historical tool to understand culture potentially, or to have insights to a culture, but you cannot use it as a justification for the existence of God, because it is pushing a narrative that is God's existence.
Yeah, like I said, it is as useful as reading the Lord of the Rings to somebody to try and convince them that Middle Earth exists. It is a waste of time. Yet, this I don't understand. My brother did think that it was evidence. In fact, I used this as one of the opening clips. He started, I can't remember what the prompt was, but I believe it was a question in relation to either the resurrection of Jesus or the existence of God, and he immediately started to read scripture. And I told him, there's nothing that you're going to get from the Bible that's going to be useful here. And he said, well, it's because it's not about evidence. And it's like, well, it is, but the Bible isn't evidence. It's not evidence. If the Bible is evidence of God, then why is the Quran not evidence of the Muslim God, which, contrary to what he said, is actually the same God of Abraham that Christians and Jews believe in? But I digress.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine about that very topic when it came to the debate, because they watched that, at least the intro bit of that debate, and we were talking about that phrase there. It's not about evidence. And I made a comment. I think it's really true. It's an interesting position to be in a debate setting with an atheist, right? Because all an atheist deals in is evidence.
Yeah, we don't have faith. Well, we do have faith in some things, but...
And it just makes me wonder, does he realize how useless it the whole conversation becomes when we are boldly asserting that evidence has no place?
Well, if he did realize how useless that was, he wouldn't have done it. But yeah, just imagine yourself as a Christian and a Mormon coming up and reading the Book of Mormon to you to try and convince you that to be honest, I don't know much about Mormons, but but that the Trinity isn't real and that their God is the right one, which is also the God of Abraham. And think about how silly that would appear. And that's the exact same situation as a Christian to an atheist.
The thing about Mormons is that not that some of the claims of Christians aren't ridiculous, but some of the claims of Mormons are just flat out provably false.
Oh man, there's a great quote from Sam Harris. He said, "We can say, I think I've said this to you before. We can say objectively, as an objective fact, that Mormonism is less likely than Christianity to be true. Objectively."
And that guy's an atheist, right?
Sam Harris?
Yeah.
And you'd be saying, well, how could you objectively say that one religion is less likely than another religion? And it's because Mormonism is just Christianity with some extra stupid ideas. Therefore, objectively, it has to be less likely than Christianity. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. But, yeah, so the Bible, in regards to establishing God's existence, is a useless tool. It is completely useless.
It is not a useless book.
Yeah, that says nothing to its value. That says nothing to its writing, its scripture, its teachings. It says nothing to any of that. The book could be, even if it didn't have all the problems with endorsing slavery and the amount of genocide that God commands and the human sacrifice like Jesus and all these other very fun things that God commands. Even if it had none of that and it was replaced with sunflowers and rainbows, it still would have no say, nothing. It would say nothing to the existence of a God, nothing at all. And it can't. Imagine if isn't it like interesting that God speaks through the medium of writing? How weird would it be to find a God that speaks through the medium of a DVD?
Yeah.
Yet it's the same thing. Yet one seems completely preposterous and one seems, well, there's an entire religion based off of it.
Well, I mean, we talked about it in the debate, but that kind of leads into the problem of divine hiddenness. Why, if a God wants to govern his creation and teach his creation, why would he not present himself?
Right. If God can divinely inspire the Bible authors to write perfect text, then he can divinely inspire the human race to interpret it correctly.
You know what's
and
hilarious?
There wouldn't be 20 denominations, but he didn't.
I just had a funny thought just now. So non-Mormons make fun of Mormonism for the interesting decision from their perspective for God to have, I don't know the exact the process of events here, but golden plates be present, and then that is the word of God, and then Joseph Smith digs them up and then copies them down on paper. And that's ridiculous, because why would God not just show the original text, right?
Yeah.
But in Christianity, we are using humans as instruments to put down words on paper or on scrolls or whatever. It's an interesting it's ridiculous for them to do it, but it's not ridiculous to...
Like I said, you'll get a Christian to start talking like an atheist when you try to convince a Christian of a different religion. It's the best way to do it. But they don't apply that same scrutiny to their own religion. They just don't, because it's because they were indoctrinated. And most people stick with what they're told when they were kids and grew up with. But so she goes on to say later that let's see. She said, "I will say that unfortunately many of us do not live out our faith to its fullest degree, especially in America, which can create a poor reputation that there is no real change when you become a Christian." That I totally couldn't agree with more. I think I mentioned this in part in relation to a lot of people don't care about the truth value of the religion that they're in and how they sometimes shop, so to speak, for religions. This is what I'm talking about. Specifically, like she said, I don't think I mentioned this in the episode, but it's true. It's mainly in America. People do not actually care about the religion that they're in. They don't. There's so many non-practicing Christians in America. Like, I bet you a lot of them, if you just pulled them aside, they would not even know what denomination they're in. They wouldn't know what they believe.
Oh, I can absolutely verify that that's true. I've had so many conversations with Christians, and I've asked them about their denomination, and they won't have one. And so I assume, well, maybe they're just either non-denominational or they're just not well versed. So I will probe for their beliefs, and they don't have them.
Right.
They, well, how do you feel about baptism? Well, they haven't thought about it. They haven't thought about it. But that's what
we're talking about. They haven't thought about the religion.
That's a pretty integral part of the discussion of not only Christianity, but specifically denominationalism. What denomination you fall into, baptism is a very big part of what denomination you're going to be a part of, whether it's a Baptist or others.
Yeah, Methodist, Calvinist, Arminianist. Those are the two. Calvinist and Arminianist are kind of the two most hot to talk about because they're so opposing.
Well, those are more like categories more than denominations, I'd say.
Calvinist is certainly, Calvinist is certainly just a normal Protestant denomination. John Calvin was a Protestant.
Yeah, well, there's also Protestantism.
And so was Jacob Arminian.
Mm-hmm. At least the way I think about it, I think of those more as schools of thought that can be transposed on top of other denominations as opposed to distinct denominations within and of themselves. Because you don't really go driving downtown and you see a Calvinist church. That's kind of my thought process. You'll see a Protestant church, or you'll see a.
I was gonna say the churches. There's. I guess you do see like Methodist and Baptist church.
I think and I could be wrong, and it doesn't really matter that much. But I always thought of those more as kind of a theological framework as opposed to a distinct denomination.
Right. There's a lot of Protestant denominations, but most Protestants are gonna probably agree that even the opposing denomination of Protestant to them is probably still gonna go to heaven. They probably still believe most of the stuff. Like the core things are there. Believe in Jesus Christ. Works they don't mean anything. They're not going to get you into heaven. All this stuff. The real mutual exclusivity starts to come in once you bring in Eastern Orthodox and Catholicism. Those Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, and Catholicism are like, those are the three like big three Christian. There are mutual exclusive views of those three. And then even those are housed under the one of the big five God of Abraham denominations, which these aren't even denominations. I don't think you would call them, but there's the big ones of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Mormonism, and Jehovah's Witness are the five.
I always get confused by that. Is Jehovah's Witness not just like Christians? Is that like different?
They're the one I know least about of the five, but they're not. They're not just Christians. That's for sure.
I don't know much about them either.
They have their own Bible translation that is pretty different. It's quite different than your typical like NIV, ESV stuff.
I suppose that would have to make them a different kind of religion in a lot of ways, because you can't just go changing the text.
Right. But they still believe in the God of Abraham as named by Jehovah.
As do other people, the Abrahamic religions, yeah.
Which and they don't believe in the. Do they? Jehovah's Witness? Didn't we Google this? Do Jehovah's Witness believe in the Trinity?
I don't remember.
I thought they did.
Do Jehovah's
Mormons don't, Muslims don't, and Jews don't.
To believe in the Trinidad. Yep, that's what I was trying to say. All right.
Christianity's unique in that way, I think.
Well, one of the top results is a Reddit thread saying how to explain the Trinity to Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, so that makes me think they probably don't. How to explain the Trinity to Jehovah's Witnesses?
Why do here's a question. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses not believe Jesus is God?
So I think it's probably safe to assume that they don't.
Yeah.
So Christianity is the only one that does, which is interesting.
Mormon people?
Mormonismists
don't?
No, I don't think so.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Mormon?
I swear. Mormons don't believe Jesus was God. If they do, my mind's gonna be blown. Because if Jesus was, didn't Joe Smith throw like a wrench into things? I don't think Joe Smith was God. That's for sure. Well, I think they only think God was God.
Whatever they believe in, they call it the Godhead. What is that?
I'm sure
the Trinity of traditional Christianity is referred to as the Godhead by members of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, Mormon. Like other Christians, Latter-day Saints believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost. Yet, church teachings about the Godhead differ from the traditional Christians. For example, while some believe the three members of the Trinity are one substance, Latter-day Saints believe they are three physically separate beings, but fully one in love, purpose, and will.
Okay, so the
answer is kind of.
So the answer is no in the Christian sense, where Jesus is 100% God, but also 100% man, which doesn't make any sense. But
I don't. Yeah, the whole idea of the Trinity in general is just kind of confusing. What it really sounds like we're saying, and people talk about the Spirit and God and Jesus. I feel like even Christians kind of refer to them as three separate beings.
oh, of course, because Jesus acts like a separate being from God.
But it's more just like one entity taking on different forms. That's all it really.
But even then, Jesus himself said he's going to return. But in the Bible, he is quoted saying, "Not even I don't know when I'm going to return. Only the Father knows." Well, that's not 100% God.
That would throw a wrench into the system.
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
that's about 90-something% God, but it ain't 100.
But it's also 100.
But it's also 100 apparently. Yeah, don't think about it and it'll make sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I gotta stop doing that.
Yeah,
Jeez.
so of course they refer to Jesus and God as separate people because it's Jesus. He came to say, and I'm pretty sure he did say that he's not here to alter the teachings of God, yet he teaches to turn the other cheek. And God did not do that at all in the Old Testament. That's for freaking sure. Guy pulled out, dead.
That's what he said.
Yeah. And his brother's wife, no less. So
does now you're gonna have to school me on some religion here. Did Jesus actually say that he's not come to alter the teachings of God?
I'm pretty sure.
Because if he did say that, Jesus is wrong. Because you're right.
He didn't teach
even
what God did at
even
all.
Christians today. I remember this from being a Christian. People, atheists specifically, would come and they would say, "How could you say that this is a good religion to follow when you look at the Old Testament and it's all violence?" And even Christians would say, "Well, with
that's
Jesus,
the old covenant.
That's the old covenant, and Jesus came in and everything's different now."
Perhaps he didn't. I might be misconstruing that. He might not have literally said that. But what definitely is said is that God is unchanging.
Yeah, I suppose.
But when Jesus teaches different things than what God did in the Old Testament, and Jesus is supposed to be God, that's change.
But if it was the plan all along, then it's not change. Remember the timeline. The timeline.
You're right. The future has already happened. God has everything planned out, and nothing changes from there. That's what it must have meant. Not that God doesn't change. He just doesn't change his plan of changing.
Yeah.
He doesn't change his future plan to change.
God planned to change, but that plan was pre-change.
Exactly. But the plan itself does not change. So God is unchanging.
All right, we've got it. We're theologians.
Right, we are, exactly. Apologists come at us. Yeah, anyway, so Emily Wade, it's unlikely that she's watching this episode, but if she is, just a huge, huge, huge dump of appreciation for commenting such an expansive comment.
Even if we don't agree, it's very nice to have a representation of another opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we had Adam here, and that was great too.
Absolutely.
But just more opinions, the better, and we can discuss them, right? And if anybody listening to this right now disagrees with us now, then
please
do a follow-up.
Disagree with us in the comments, please. We would love to discuss disagreements, and that's one of my favorite things to do is argue.
Show is.
Yeah. But so let's on the topic of God, let's talk about why he exists. So This is gonna be a quick turn. This is gonna be a turnaround. But so I finished Lights On, right?
Yeah.
And man, could I not recommend this book enough? Holy frick. This was like, dude, this is what I vibe on. This is what wakes me up in the morning. This is the mystery and physics. Holy crap, does it get into physics? Like real fundamental stuff. And dude, so consciousness, right?
It's a favorite topic around here.
Favorite topic around here, consciousness and religion. So let's see. How do I start this that in a way that it makes sense? So as we learn more about how quantum physics affects the world, we learn more and more about how not in reality the world is compared to how we intuitively perceive it to be. Just an example of that is time. Time is something we do know. Well, we don't know anything about time, but we do know how it works slightly.
We know how it feels.
We know how it feels. Yeah. Intuitively, it feels like it flows and there's just past, present, future, when in reality, there is no such thing as the present, because my present is not the present of another planet that has a slightly different warping of space-time. My exact right now is not the exact same as your exact right now, because not only does time slow down as you move in space, for example, if you travel at the speed of light, time stops and slows down all the way up to that point. It slows down with matter because matter bends it. So my amount of matter is not the same as your amount of matter. Therefore, time does not pass the same for each of us. Therefore, there is no right now. There is no such thing as the present across the universe. There's my present from my point of view, and there's his present from his point of view. And there's the present of this Sprite 0 plus T can, right? But time is passing differently for everywhere in the universe. And if I get up and start walking, time's going to slow down a little bit more for me than it would have if I stayed stationary. Which is, I keep saying this, but that's just freaking insane.
Yeah, that doesn't actually make any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, that was actually wrong. If I get up and start walking, time for me is exactly the same as what it always is going to feel like for me. But the world around me will speed up, and I will slow down for the world around me if I get up and start walking, because I'm in motion now.
So if I watch you, let's think of ourselves as light speed beings for a second. So if you get up and walk over there, you're going to slow down quite a bit for me. Looking at you, is that right?
Well, if I'm actually traveling at light speed, I will be a stationary object to you because time will have stopped for me. If I'm traveling at light speed, time stops.
Okay.
That's why.
Gotcha. Yep.
That's why the event horizon of a black hole, where light speed is no longer sufficient to escape the gravitational pull, time stops. There is no time past the event horizon of a black hole.
Correct. Yeah.
So if I was at 99.9999% the speed of light and got up and started walking,
be real slow.
Then for me, I might, in a few hundred years, you might see me get out of my chair. Maybe.
But you're not. You're moving pretty quick though. You're walking normally.
In fact, by the time I get over there, the heat death of the world might have happened. Which is crazy.
By the time you get over here and look back, there's going to be nothing to look back at.
Exactly. Right. Between here and there, the world probably will be engulfed by the sun expanding at that point. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's a bizarre thought.
But that's not science fiction, is the thing. That's real. So, but it's not intuitive. Nobody's going to know that unless we have scientific tests. So, as we learn more about quantum physics, we learn more stuff like that. The world does not work how it appears to work. So this is going to be crazy. Atoms, right? We've discussed this a little bit. What could there be a most fundamental particle?
Yeah.
Right now, the smallest thing we've ever discovered is a quark, which I believe is what happens when two protons in a particle accelerator smash up against each other and explode into two little quarks. I'm pretty sure that's the smallest thing we've ever gotten to. I don't think there's anything smaller than quarks. And protons are one of three components that make up an atom. So we're already going pretty small. So let's just say a quark is the most fundamental thing. Quantum nonsense starts happening at the level of a proton or an electron. So not much smaller than an atom. I don't actually know how big a fundamental particle is in relation to an atom, but I do know that an atom is mostly empty space. So I don't actually know how big a proton or an electron is, but I know a quark is smaller. At that level, you talked about spatial dimensions and how perhaps consciousness is a dimension. She mentioned that. Maybe it is a dimension in the same way that time is a dimension. There are 4 dimensions that we know of, 3 of space, 1 of time. Maybe consciousness is similar to a time dimension.
Could be.
But if consciousness is fundamental, when we say fundamental, we mean really actually there's nothing before it. Fundamental. Truly fundamental. And if that's the case, then consciousness is before the construction of an atom, before the construction of a proton, maybe even before the construction of whatever makes up a quark. But at the level of protons and electrons and quarks, this is also a quantum weirdness. When these things get measured, their properties are different from when they are unmeasured. So I don't know if I sent you a video like a number of months ago of a thing called the double slit experiment.
Yeah.
I don't know if you watched that.
I did.
But you didn't?
I did.
You did. Yeah.
I don't ask me if I can remember it, but I did watch that.
Yeah. Well, that's just an example of how at the quantum level, things get different. Things react differently when you look at it versus when you don't. So, and that doesn't mean there's a conscious observer of it. It just simply means, I say simply, there's nothing simple about it, and I don't understand it. I'm saying
simply.
Yeah. I'm saying things that I barely understand. It's just because it's so small that a light particle, we need light to see, right?
Yeah.
Everything's useless in terms of seeing things without light. The light is bigger than the particle. So the particle is not being hit by the light, as far as I understand. That's why when we observe things at the quantum level, stuff gets weird. Because when there's light particles going at it or something like that, it fricks with the electron. Anyway, so that's not really important. The important part is it's relatively a consensus view among most theoretical physicists at this point that spatial dimensions are 3 that we know of. Space is emergent. Space itself is not fundamental. Because at this quantum level, first of all, we don't even know if these things are going only in up, down, left, right, forward, back. These things are probably, this is where we get into like string theory a little bit. String theory, there's like 9 spatial dimensions or something like that. Something we couldn't even.
I've heard that number before.
Yeah, we couldn't even like begin to think about this in our ooga booga brains. But so space, our 3-dimensional space, at least at our scale, is probably emergent. And if space is emergent, like the distance between me and you is emergent of quantum properties, and space is inextricably linked with time. Time itself could also be emergent of quantum properties. So I've there's this thing called the Planck length.
Yeah.
Which is the smallest measurable point. I don't exactly know how big that is in relation to something like a quark, but I know it's small. It's 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. So if you take a centimeter, 10 with 33 zeros behind it, smaller than 1 centimeter. And granted, 1 trillion, a trillionth, is 9 zeros. Excuse me, is that a billion? A million is 9 zeros. Trillion is 12 zeros, ain't it?
Sounds right.
So okay,
Yeah.
so a trillion is 12 zeros. A trillion's a lot, but this is 10 to the minus 33. There's 33 zeros on this thing. So that's small.
Yeah,
that's pretty small.
That's small.
So that's the Planck length. That was, I believe, the equation for that was discovered by Max Planck. There is also, I did not know this, there is also a Planck time.
Interesting.
A smallest point of time.
Okay.
To where any smaller than that, time does not, there like the smallest measurement of time. Time is not something you think of as like points, of like a succession of points. It's something that feels like it's continuous, right? But there's Planck time. There is a smallest time. So this is crazy. 10 to the minus 44 seconds. So 1 second, 10 and 44 zeros smaller than that. So that's just not even.
My question would be, how do you come to that conclusion?
Ask Max Planck. He's dead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, where do I find him? I don't.
that I don't know. I can tell you, it's not by intuition. It's by mathematics. It was discovered through mathematics, like most physics today. So there's a Planck time at this scale, at this tiny scale, Planck length, Planck time. Quantum stuff is happening, right? In ways that we can't see, observe. But don't ask me how they got here. Like I said, it's almost a consensus view at this point, as far as I understand among scientists, that space is emergent. Space itself is not fundamental. Okay. Time itself, this is a little bit more disputed, but time, there are a lot that think time is fundamental, a lot that think time is not fundamental. That one's a little bit more confusing. But consciousness,
okay,
could be more fundamental than if consciousness is fundamental to matter, right? And there's quantum stuff happening before matter and space. We are at a level of consciousness before the emerging space and consciousness before emerging time. If I say consciousness exists outside of space and outside of time, what does it sound like I'm describing to you?
Outside of space and time?
Yeah, consciousness outside of space and time.
It sounds something of a religious sort.
It sounds like I'm saying God.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Me too. But that might be if this is crazy. This is why I said this is going to be a 180, because this is the closest thing to God that I think we could discover. Now, granted, I don't think you're going to find the God of the Bible under this microscope, right? But the idea that consciousness could exist as fundamental, and if it is fundamental and space and time is not, then that means that they're outside of space and time, consciousness could exist, which sounds like God.
Let's backtrack just a little bit. So how are we to first establish this? How are we claiming that consciousness is before anything? When we don't really know what consciousness is?
Well, matter, like I said, when we get to the scale of the Planck scale, space, I'll relate this to what you said. If there is a smallest thing, that is what we would call a dimensionless thing, a point.
Right.
if there is a most fundamental piece.
Mhm.
And given that it is not clear that consciousness comes from anything relating, given there's, it's not clear that consciousness has any stopping point in regards to intelligence, right? Like we said,
Okay.
like we said, what the plant's doing.
Right, as in what did you say? It was a 0 to 100% consciousness, right? Was that
Yeah, given that there's no obvious point where consciousness goes from, 0 to 1,
Mhm.
or since we have it and we know it exists, there's no point where it's obvious where it goes from 1 to 0.
Yeah,
There's no obvious point where it stops, right?
and is therefore infinite.
Yeah, exactly.
Potentially.
But perhaps
Yeah.
it could not stop. It could be just a part of existence.
Mm.
Granted, that's another discussion. Existence.
I guess what my holdup then is for those listening, I'm using my hands to convey that I'm struggling to put a sentence together. If
When you can't speak sentence, hand wave sentence.
I'm trying to mime out a sentence that I can't speak. So, how could we claim consciousness comes before matter when theoretically consciousness is not matter at all? And why does that necessitate before and not after? You getting my question? This is a very weird question.
You're asking why, where the assertion,
Where does consciousness enter?
right,
And why in this example that
why
we're bringing
before
up?
matter than after?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, first of all, because after matter would be discoverable. If it is coming after matter and we have access to tools that can measure all things matter, that means that there is a point where consciousness is not and then becomes, that we can discover, that we have not.
Is time before matter also? Or is time after matter?
Well, matter and space, it generally is understood to probably be emergent of quantum properties, but time is more split down the middle. Some think time is emergent, some think time is fundamental.
Define that for me, emergence. What is that? What is that?
Emergence.
I know the term, but I'm not
So
familiar with the context.
something else comes out. This is kind of a simple thing, but it's hard for me to see. I don't understand it well enough to be able to explain it simply. So you might just want to look up a definition. But how I would describe it is something else that appears out of lower level complex properties or interactions, like like emergence. I don't know if this is the right description, but chair. The chair emerges as it's assembled.
The word emergence is a very understandable and digestible word. But what is quantum emergence? Okay, the phenomenon where new properties or behaviors arise in a system that are not present in its individual components.
That's yes.
Let me read that to myself here again. That where new properties or behaviors arise in a system that is not present in its individual components. Is it saying new properties that are not present in the components that came before it, or in its?
Yes.
Okay. The way that worded made it sound like the properties are not present in its own self, which doesn't make any sense.
Like I'm trying to think of a real world example of emergence, but like cars can drive when engine plus wheels plus ignition plus other things are assembled. Gonna wait for that to pass. Yeah, so its new properties that it gets is its ability to move and drive. That's an emergent property of more component, more. What was it? What did it say? More.
Oh, Jesus.
More fundamental component parts, something like that.
Phenomena where new properties or behaviors arise in a system that are not present in its individual components.
Yeah. Driving is an emergent property of the individual components of engine, wheel, ignition.
Oh God, oh Jesus Christ, what am I thinking of? We had a whole conversation about something. What did we talk? You and I talk.
Yeah.
And we did one time, and we talked about. I remember I was referencing a book by a guy named Edward Fazer, who was also referencing Aristotle, and I brought up the idea of. Oh my God. What
I have no idea what you're going at right now.
Potentials. That's what it was. It was like
like potentiality and actuality.
Yes, that's what it was. Potentiality and actuality. So
that's an Aristotelian.
Yeah. And that's what I brought this up, and we had talked about that. And what this reminds me of is the potentiality. That's the word you used. The potentiality of a system.
Yeah.
Even though, and also its actual components. So the actual components have a potentiality to do something else. And so what we're saying is a potentiality become actual is an emergent property. Correct?
There has to be multiple potentiality components for a new actuality to emerge. The potentiality, there's multiple components, right? Let's say there's 5 components.
Yeah.
These 5 components on their own cannot do what emerges once these 5 components are assembled.
Okay, so we're adding another layer to this. So it's not just that things have actual and potential.
Yeah.
It's that systems made up of components have potentials within and of themselves that can become actual, and those properties emerge.
Yeah.
Because of the combination of things.
Yeah. For example, let's just say a computer. CPUs are mind-blowingly complex.
Yeah.
But computation cannot happen if you take one what's the word I'm looking for here? One transistor.
Yeah.
If you have one transistor, you're going nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you have however many billion they put in these frickers, computation happens. That is an emergent property of smaller component parts.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So
the smaller component part of matter is proton, neutron, electron for an atom. Smaller than those, a quark. At that level, see, the reason it's hard for me to explain this is because I don't understand it.
Okay.
So I'm not a physicist, as much as I would kill to be one. I'm not. So at this level, time and space. Let me go back to where you said, suppose there's a most fundamental particle. If there is such a thing, let's just pretend it's a quark. Let's say quarks are the smallest thing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if they are, but they might be. Who knows? That is spatially dimensionless. Okay, there is no up, down, left, right, forward, backward to it. If that is what a point is.
Yeah.
At that point, when you zoom in to view this thing, it doesn't it doesn't act in space. This is so hard to even say. I can't explain it, but I got it when it was explained to me.
Okay.
But that does not translate into me explaining it to somebody else. Long story short, space as 3 dimensions as we know it most likely does not exist at a most fundamental particle level. Space, the distance, probably is emergent of what's called energy. So when let me think of the example. I'm trying to think. There's an example that he used. So space could be emergent out of quantum properties that create energy in the same. So me looking at you, when I see you, our energies are aligned. Or if not look at you, if I touch you, if we touch tips right now, our energies are on the same frequency. But when we're not touching, our energies are off. Now, the example that this was given is if there's 2 people singing, okay? One's singing a high tone and one's singing a low tone. They're not aligned, right? But as the high tone person starts deepening their pitch and as the low tone person starts raising their pitch, the pitch being the frequency of energy that these fundamental particles are emitting, as the pitches align, that is what converging in space is.
And they synchronize.
Exactly. That is what you and me touching would be.
Interesting.
That could potentially be how space itself is emergent from quantum properties, quantum energy, quantum stuff. Is you and I aren't actually a distance away. We are simply, gotta stop saying simply. There's nothing simple about it, but that our quantum boot bops are on different energy frequencies, I think is how it was described. And if we touch, the chorus aligns in pitch, so to speak. The energy is on the same frequency level. And that's how space is likely emergent of quantum particles. This is what's crazy is that this space being emergent or 3-dimensional whatever is largely, as I understand, consensus view among physicists. So this is a little bit more of an established thing. Time being fundamental is not. That's disputed. Right. But space, yeah.
Space being emergent as opposed to what?
It being fundamental. As opposed
Understood.
to
okay.
Space being there before everything else. Space being there, independent of matter, space existing. If our universe existed but there was no matter.
That's a very interesting idea because you'd think if matter, let's just brainstorm. Matter appears, but dimensionless or devoid of space.
Right.
What does that even look like?
We don't exactly. An atom has measurements of size. And if it has a size measurement, that means it exists in space. But again, that space could be simply an emergent property of quantum weirdness that gets even smaller than that. And like I said, if consciousness is fundamental to quantum weirdness, if consciousness is as fundamental as quantum weirdness and small stuff, then that means consciousness comes before space. And if time is also not fundamental, like space likely is, then consciousness could be pre-space and time. Which, again, sounds like
and what about matter?
Well, matter
is matter fundamental in this?
It would just depends on what you would describe as matter. What I think of as matter is an atom up.
That's kind of what I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Which I would say no. Matter
Okay.
is not fundamental.
Okay. What is fundamental?
we don't know if there is. Who frick, dude? I don't know. We've got the quarks.
Interesting.
Yeah. So again,
and why? And forgive my ignorance. And I don't even know if this is ignorance. Why is quarks not matter? What is a quark?
so I believe a quark is the component parts of a proton. Either that or like an it might be the component parts of an electron. But an electron is not matter. It is a wave particle. It's as far as I understand. Well, an electron is both because quantum weirdness, when you observe it, it acts like a particle. Unobserved, it acts like a wave. Look up a quark. Is a quark proton? Two smashed together. What they did is in a particle accelerator, they put these tiny fundamental particles in a particle accelerator and accelerate them to like 99.999% the speed of light and smash them together. Particle accelerator accelerates the particle.
It's an elementary particle, and it's a fundamental. Where was I? It's a fundamental constituent of matter.
Well, yeah, but
and it is what? Okay. Particles called hadrons. Hadrons.
hedron.
No, it's an A. Hadrons.
Hmm.
What is it though? That's what I want to know. Okay. Wait, no. That's what a proton is. A proton is composed of two up quarks and one down quark.
Okay, yeah. So quarks have what's called a spin associated with them. It's either spin up or spin down.
Oh,
it's like a property that they have. So so it is a proton. It's two up spin quarks and one down spin quark.
Yeah, proton.
And that's what okay. I thought it was a proton. Yeah. So
there's also an antiquark.
What?
I don't know. Antiparticle, antiquark.
Wouldn't that just be antimatter, which is something that we haven't, as far as I understand,
what is an
exists?
antiparticle? That's I'm leading us down a rabbit hole that is probably not helpful. But
okay, so 3 quarks equal a proton, and a proton, a neutron, and an electron. Because an electron, I think an electron is massless, meaning if something has no mass, it can only move at the speed of light, no slower or no faster.
I want to read this really quick because I find it very interesting. There are 6 types of known flavors of quarks.
Okay. There's more than just up spin and down spin quarks?
So there's up,
yeah,
down, charm, strange,
top
and bottom.
Okay. So there's a lot of different types of quarks.
And for every known flavor of quark, there's a corresponding antiparticle known as antiquarks.
So would 2 anti-up quarks and 1 anti-down quark create an anti-proton?
That's a terrible... You're asking the wrong guy. And I don't
And if you put an anti-proton with a neutron and electron, do you just get an anti-atom, which is just antimatter?
Maybe. That sounds right.
There's an equation for... So what antimatter would be, would bend space-time in the other way.
Yeah.
Which theoretically would make time go back, right?
Fascinating. Yeah, because it would. Yeah,
right, because it's reverse matter. Right. So there's nothing in relativity that says that that's not possible. It's probably not a naturally occurring thing, but the mathematics allow it.
That doesn't really make sense. Yeah, are antiparticles naturally occurring at all?
I don't No, I don't think so.
I would say probably not.
I think antimatter is a possible thing, but it's not naturally occurring. I don't think. It would have to be created by us. Which there's an equation that I don't know for the amount of anti-mass required to go backwards in time. Something like a white hole. A white hole is. What are you doing?
The cat has some thoughts on quantum physics.
Antimatter, yeah. So there's another thing that is allowed by the mathematics in our universe is something called white holes, which are obviously the opposite of black holes.
Yeah.
Black holes, once you go in, cross the event horizon, the whatever is in there, whatever the singularity is in there, is now no longer a point in space, but it is a point in time. That's how crazy that is. So black holes, in the same way that you can never get out of them, white holes, if you're in it, there's nothing you can do from it pushing you out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing you can do to get in it.
Mm-hmm.
That is a thing that math allows in relativity. Again, it's probably not naturally occurring, but it's. But the fact that you said that antiquarks are actually a thing,
they might be theoretically a thing. I don't know,
and probably maybe.
But I mean, potentially, I feel like we do not understand matter enough. But is it possible that the way a universe forms could have formed a separate set of fundamental properties that could theoretically allow for what we would determine as an antiparticle?
I think that is entirely within the realm of possibility, but impossible to know.
Yeah.
Given that we don't even know if our universe is the only universe or if it is one of many previous or future universes, or if universes spawn in the center of black holes. Or there's one theory of that is that since our universe, I think I've talked about this before, is the singularity in a black hole the same type of singularity that the Big Bang was? We don't know. Could our Big Bang have been the forming of a black hole inside of another universe? And the reason for that is because our universe, the edge of our universe, is currently expanding faster than the speed of light. And that doesn't break the laws of physics, because in physics it says nothing can go faster than the speed of light. That is a peak of speed, and nothing with mass can go at the speed of light. But the Big Bang and the universe expands faster than the speed of light. But that works because the edges of the universe aren't bound by the laws of physics that reside within it. So the edge of the universe can expand faster than the speed of light, but nothing inside of that universe can expand. So since for us to get to the edge of our universe, we would have to find a way to go faster than the speed of light, which is outside the laws of physics.
Yeah.
Which is, to get outside of a black hole is also outside the laws of physics in the same way. There's nothing you could do to get out of things. So that's kind of like the correlation of, could we be in a black hole? Who knows?
Yeah.
But where that doesn't make sense is that black holes don't expand.
Right.
Unless they take in more matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as far as we know, there's no new matter popping into our universe. So, but it is expanding. So that's like more theoretical, less physics, but it's definitely fun to think about. But anyway, yeah. So God could,
we
kind of went off the rails with that.
Yeah,
so
consciousness.
Let's wrap this up, because I don't understand most of the things that I've been saying here. Consciousness, if it's fundamental, and space and time is not, there could be consciousness outside of space and outside of time, which sounds like God. this, if big if, but if something like that were to be true, then we found God. We got him.
We did it.
We did it.
Sick.
Yeah, dude.
Right, let's get Adam back on the show.
Exactly. Dude, we found him. He's not hidden. He's just out. We haven't got to him yet in our theory of physics. Now, here's the thing. Just because there is possibly actual evidence for the existence of consciousness outside of space and outside of time, what that does not mean is that consciousness decided to inspire some people 6,000 years ago to write a book. Okay? That is not what that means. And that it does not mean that consciousness can talk and interact and walk in the Garden of Eden and has a back that Moses looked at. Okay? That is not what any of that means.
Yeah.
But could it be a universe starting thing? Maybe.
Wouldn't that mean that the panpsychists are more or less correct in some facet? Not in all beliefs, but in some fundamental way.
Annika Harris did not think panpsychism was. She was not a proponent of panpsychism. I don't think This is where my knowledge of panpsychism is hitting a wall, because Annika Harris was like 60-40 on the view of consciousness as fundamental, 60 in favor, but she was against panpsychism.
I feel like that probably comes down to the use case of panpsychism as it interacts with matter being incorrect, and less about the core system, as in consciousness permeates all matter, but not that consciousness creates matter, or consciousness. You see what I'm getting at? Am I getting at anything here?
Well, I believe the panpsychist view is that consciousness is a part of matter, but I think Annika's view, well, like loosely held, maybe this is true view, was consciousness was more fundamental than matter on the level of these timeless, spaceless, things.
So it's not it's not that consciousness is incorporated into what is matter. It's that it just predates it.
I think that's what, yeah. Because she was not. I think it was more along the lines of consciousness as this sort of dimension thing going on. It's not necessarily like one atom has one unit of consciousness.
Yeah, what the frick would that be?
I mean, it wasn't necessarily that view, which I believe more or less is what panpsychism is. It was more consciousness is an ever-present. It is a part of the universe in the same way that just space-time is a part. But given that space is probably an emergent and time also might be, that's where the consciousness as fundamental, when space and time is not fundamental thing, comes into play. And if space and time is not fundamental, matter along with it, which necessitates space, is also not fundamental. Therefore, consciousness being a predating thing to matter and space-time, which is not a panpsychist view.
But that consciousness is God.
But hey, that was my thing. She made no mention of God. I just thought.
I mean, you would have to take a bit of a leap to make the claim. However, it's better than any claim Christians have come up with.
I was gonna say it's more evidence than anything Christians have said so far. Like,
it's less of a leap than saying book. Good.
Yeah, it's less of a leap than saying it exists because you read a book. Exactly. So, listen, if God exists as consciousness, dude, that's sick. If God is manifest as consciousness, like, first of all these religious books be damned. Like, they don't know. That's for damn
because
sure.
if we're making that assertion, theoretically, we're not talking about the Christian God.
No, we're not talking
We're
about...
not talking about any conventional definition of God.
No, we're not talking about a God that interacts with you and talks to you through your head. That unless the thoughts you think of are what you would describe as that. We're not talking about God that, like I said, divinely inspires riders and walks through the Garden of Eden and has a back and commands genocide. We're not talking about that. We're talking about God as manifest as consciousness. That is fundamental. Before space and time.
Which sounds like God.
Which sounds like God. Dude, that's what I'm saying. This is the most evidence and most convincing theory for what sounds like a God to me so far. Like, if you guys haven't, I obviously did just a piss poor job of making this make sense, but read Lights On. Read it. It is, oh my God, your mind will be opened up to things that you did not ever think of as possible. And she talks to like 9 or 10 different, just absolute bleeding edge of our time physicists. Like, oh my God, it is an incredible book. And it is articulated much better into why this actually makes sense than what I did just now. Like, but anyway, yeah. So consciousness is probably God.
And get out your checkbooks. We're starting a church.
And we're starting a church, baby. We're starting a religion, and we're calling it Evidence Church or something like that. We have more, and we're gonna pull our dicks out and wave them as a helicopter at the other churches because we've got more evidence for what we're saying than what the other ones are saying.
Yeah.
Because the Bible is not evidence. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I got.
That's
that's the insights I've gotten.
You know
from
what?
That book.
And I can't think of a better note to leave it on, that we have found God.
Yeah, we found God. And so maybe Adam, he won. We found God.
Now, just imagine, before we close out, just imagine if we got Adam back on the podcast.
Which, sorry to cut you off, especially with this comment saying that we should talk about more topics. I don't think I mentioned that, but at the very bottom of the comment, she suggested that we talk more about this. Almost guaranteed, we will. My brother, I have to talk to him again. There is so much to talk about. Even in that long episode, we could cut out a little sliver and make an entire episode about one thing.
Yeah, dude, I had the task of keeping time, and I was sitting there like, I don't want to stop this conversation because it's so interesting.
Right, exactly. So I can almost guarantee Adam will be back. I'm saying this now unbeknownst to him, but I'm sure he would want to, because the time he was here, it was just so much fun. It was so much fun. So it's probably going to happen again. But anyway, continue.
Well, all I was going to continue was closing out the episode.
Oh.
So on that note, let us know what you think about God as consciousness predating time and space. Let us know if you have any suggestions for other topics, because I mean, we could talk all day long about religion and consciousness and different scientific topics, but if you have something else that you'd like us to explore, let us know in the comments. We would love to explore those, and we will catch you next week.
See ya.